Imagine this. You are a more or less happy owner of a Range Rover L322 which has the 3.6 liter V8 diesel engine. Suddenly you get an oil leak. An oil leak from the valve cover gaskets. Replacing these gaskets in most of the cars is fairly easy, so you most probably think that this repair is gonna be easy, right?
Wrong.
Exactly. Because in this car, replacing the valve cover gaskets is not easy at all. So let's check out why, and let's check out some of the issues of this engine. The 3.6 liter V8 diesel engine, which has two turbochargers, can be often found in the first generation Range Rover Sport and in the facelifted Range Rover L322. This engine can have numerous issues like the famous split intercooler hoses, EGR issues or faulty turbochargers. By the way, if you have this engine, then you should check at least the intercooler hoses for oil. Too much oil will indicate worn turbochargers, and since they are mounted on the sides of the engine, replacing them is not easy. And by the way, during an oil change, you should drain the oil not only from the main drain plug, but also from the second oil drain plug to prolong the lifetime of the turbochargers. But these issues are not the end of the world. The bigger issue is that this engine is not really mechanic friendly. It's simply not easy to work on it, and this is the most noticeable if you have to remove the valve covers, for example. The valve covers in this engine are not regular valve covers. For some strange reason, the engineers decided to integrate part of the intake manifold into the valve covers. To top of that, they are made completely from plastic, which is not helping the durability at all. This complex design means that the valve covers can not only leak oil because of the worn out gaskets, but they can also crack, causing a boost leak. Most of the time the right intake manifold part of the valve cover cracks somewhere here on top. In this case you can get various symptoms which are gonna get only worse over time. The new genuine valve cover is not cheap at all, but there is an aftermarket replacement which is half of the price. However, some owners decided to buy a used valve cover which can work, or they tried to fix the crack somehow, which most probably is not gonna work. But buying the spare part is easy. Removing it, that is the fun part, mainly on the L322.
Talk to the hand.
Unlike on the Range Rover TD6, where there is so much space that you can walk around in the engine compartment, cars with the 3.6 liter V8 don't have much space around the engine. This means that removing the valve covers, valve cover gaskets or even the injectors is not easy at all. Long story short, removing the intake manifold and the associated parts, pipes, hoses and other stuff around the engine is labor intensive. But this is not the fun part. The fun part starts when you have to remove the injectors. Removing the first 3 injectors on both sides is fine, but removing the last injectors closest to the firewall is simply not possible. In this case you have 3 choices. You can remove the whole engine, which is not easy. You can separate the injector so you remove the top part of it. This is not recommended since you will most probably ruin the injector. And lastly, you can unscrew the engine mount bolts and jack up the engine a little to gain more space around the top of it. This is possible and doable unless your engine mount bolts are rusted out completely. And also accessing the right engine mount is harder than the left one. If you want to see this process in more detail, then I would recommend you to check out this guy's video series where he replaced the valve cover gasket on the left side of the engine. Also, if you are gonna do this job and remove everything, then you should definitely get all the injectors at least tested and preventively replace the injector washers as well. Interestingly, on the Range Rover Sport it is possible to remove the valve covers and all the injectors without lifting up the engine, since there is more space around it. Except the valve cover oil leak, this engine will also leak from the area between the cylinder heads. Here you can expect oil leak from the oil cooler and oil filter mounting bracket, plus a coolant leak from the plastic thermostat assembly. You can see these parts only after you remove the intake manifold, so replacing the gaskets and the thermostat assembly is not an easy job either. But at least you don't have to remove or jack up the engine for this. These were some of the things which are worth knowing if you want to buy a TDV8 engine. But if you really want to be an owner of a Range Rover L322, then you should also know about rust issues, gearbox problems, or about air suspension issues, for example. So let's briefly check out this stuff a bit more closely. Right now I'm not gonna talk about rust, since I already did a detailed video about all the possible rust spots of the L322, which you should definitely check out. Meanwhile, let's move on to the gearbox. The 3.6-liter V8 diesel engine in the L322 is always mated to a 6-speed regular automatic gearbox, which is not known for premature failure. But after approximately 200,000 kilometers, it can develop issues, mostly in cars which never had a gearbox oil change, or in cars which were used for towing. Most of the time just the torque converter gets worn, but sometimes the whole gearbox is gonna require a repair. So check the gearbox properly before buying. It has to change gears smoothly, without fluctuating RPMs or shuddering. Lastly, there is the suspension. In these cars you can have two types of air suspension. The regular air suspension with regular shocks, or the adaptive air suspension with electronically adjustable shocks. In cars with this more complex suspension type, the stiffness of the shocks can be changed. Plus, in this case you can notice a visible wire on top of the front shock absorbers and a small accumulator on the rear shocks. The electronically adjustable shock absorbers are approximately twice that expensive as the regular type, plus they can sometimes get stuck in the stiffer mode, so keep this in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is that the air strut leaks are inevitable, but they are not that expensive to buy and you can prolong the lifetime of them. Long story short, dirt and small rocks will stick to the lower area of the struts, and as the strut moves, the dirt acts like a sandpaper which will cause small cracks over time, and this will result in leaks. So regularly cleaning this area on all of the air struts will extend the lifetime of them. To summarize things up, the 3.6-liter V8 diesel engine is not the worst engine in the world. With proper maintenance it will last more than 400,000 kilometers and even 500,000 kilometers. But you have to be ready to fix the already mentioned stuff either by having enough money or by having skill and willpower. So just think twice before buying.